Welcome, everybody. I see lots of familiar names in the attendee list, so thank you. Welcome. It's good to have you here, even if I can't see you and talk to you. A version of this presentation I shared at Quirks in Chicago last month, and it brought, it created some interesting dialogue and conversation. So we wanted to kind of share it out more broadly. I want to start out kind of by talking about how the landscape's changed. I've been doing this for 26 years, long time, too long. And when I started, things were very different, right? Everything was phone or mail or in person. And then, we had this glorious revolution of online research that really changed how we did things, made things more efficient, in some cases more cost effective. It was great. But in some ways, we've kind of broken it over time, or society's broken it, or a number of factors have come in to make it more difficult. So what we've seen is that, the sampling and data collection landscape has really become more challenging, specifically in the quantitative space. It's just become harder to do our jobs and to collect data that we feel is high quality, valid, reliable data. It's true whether or not you're doing, panel research, you're going out to a panel or some outside source for research, or you have a list, a customer list, a database, contact list. Both of those things have become challenging for different reasons. And, this is for everybody, but it's certainly exacerbated with harder to reach audiences and B2B audiences. So I don't want to, just to give kind of a sense, for example, when you look at email sends, you have a list you're going to send out blind. I'm talking about blind here, not you're sending to your own customers with your own email. We used to see studies where we used to see somewhere between 5 and 10% response rate. That turned last maybe 5 years ago to 2%, then to 1%. And now in certain cases, especially with B2B audiences, we're seeing less than 0.5%, 0.3%. It's just becoming a really uphill climb to do those types of studies. Similarly, or relatedly, when it comes to panel research and who we're getting, the completes we're getting on online panels, we used to, we've always cleaned data. We've always looked at the data that we get from panels, and we used to clean out something like 5 to 10%. I'll be honest, and I've heard this from clients as well who are doing their own data collection, it can be as high as 50% or more that we're just dumping from this data we're getting from panels. So it's just putting us in a really difficult position, and it's making it harder to do our jobs, right? To generate insights and recommendations and make smart business decisions for the business, if we don't know that we're getting good data, quality data. So I don't want to spend most of the conversation talking about it, but I do want to talk a little bit about kind of what's behind that and what's driving the trend. I don't think there's any one factor that's responsible. I think there's some themes. When it comes to email sends, right, where you have a list, whether that's a database that exists or your customer list, but it's going out blind, there's a couple things. One is stronger spam filters and firewalls, right? Stuff just is not going through. It's being blocked. And again, that's more common on B2B side where companies have a lot of firewall, but even on the consumer side, right? Even my AOL account throws stuff into spam. Yes, I still have an AOL account. I have the same email since I got out of college. But another piece of it, and it was so funny because when I was doing this presentation at Quirks, it was the day after I finished my internal training on phishing and data security, and all about how don't click on a link when you get an email. Whatever you do, don't click on the link if you don't know who it's from. So obviously, if we're saying that internally, everybody knows that. Everybody feels that way. So you're sending out an email, hey, please take our survey. We really want your feedback. People are very skeptical. I don't want to click on the link. People get too many emails. People are using email less. All of those things are leading to those kind of plummeting response rates that I referenced. On the flip side, with panels, I have to say, it's not on this list, but I have to bring up the fact that I think, I mentioned we had this revolution and that we've kind of broken. And I think there's been a lot of pressure to get more for less cost. I think we have really worked hard to commoditize panel and panel sample. And unfortunately, I think that has made it more difficult to maintain a certain level of quality. So that's kind of an industry issue. But then when it comes to just sort of the reality of it, you set up a network, you set up a system where people are going to get rewarded and somebody's going to try to take advantage of it. And so, we see scammers and people who are just lying to take surveys. And now we see sort of technology getting really, really sophisticated in that space, right? AI, we all know the things that ChatGPT can do, the bots. Every time, the panel companies or the security companies try to figure out a way to stop it, it gets more sophisticated. It just gets harder and harder to do that. We also write really long surveys and complex surveys that are difficult to answer and are kind of boring and not engaging. And so all of that, I think, has over time really hurt feasibility and data quality on panel. So those are kind of the things that are behind, some of the things that are behind the issues that we're facing. So, at the end of the day, I do not have a magic bullet answer. I do not have, just do this and you'll be able to collect all the data you want and it'll be super high quality. I don't have a cure. I'm just going to share some of the things we've done, we're doing, and some of the things that, I've heard from colleagues at other firms and I've heard from clients that they're doing. So I am going to I'll ask you right now to think about it, because I am going to ask at the end, kind of in lieu of the Q&A, if we can all kind of share some of, nothing proprietary, but some of sort of things we've done, tips and tricks. I think it benefits us all if we can solve this problem. Because as an industry, we're losing some credibility when we can't collect quality data. So the first thing I'm going to say, which is kind of counterintuitive when I'm doing a webinar about quantitative data collection, but we have been leveraging more qualitative methodologies in situations where historically we might have done quant. In some situations, first of all, qual is great. We all know qual is great. You can get a lot of depth of content. You can get really deep insights. But you also can feel much more confident that the people you're talking to are the people that they're supposed to be, right? I know right away if I'm moderating, if someone's not who they're supposed to be, or they kind of fudged on a screener, and that's it. I can get rid of them. I can replace them. So I know, qual doesn't solve all our issues. We need numbers, we need data. But I think using it maybe in some situations where you might have used quant, especially again with B2B where the audience is more limited, I think it can be really robust. You can do a little bit, more qual. I'm not saying do 50, but like you can do a little bit more. And I think, it can really help you make those decisions and uncover those insights. But again, it's not the only answer, because sometimes we need quant. Another thing that we have seen a lot more and seen it used quite successfully are communities, right? So our clients having a vetted, engaged group of participants that can be branded or unbranded, right? They can build it unbranded separately. And that can yield very high response rates because there's a lot of engagement. Response rates tend to be 50, 60, 70% in some communities. And you can feel confident. You've vetted these people, you know who they are. So I have seen clients leverage very sizable communities where they can do quant week after week and get 300, 500 completes. So it can be really, really, if you leverage it well, can give you very robust sample and be really helpful. And you can use it. I have one client that uses it every week, is doing surveys with 2 different populations and getting hundreds of completes. Of course, there are limits and there are barriers to this approach. Cost is one of them. Building a community and maintaining a community is not cheap. It's pretty expensive. There's a lot of investment required. It also, you're talking to the same people over and over. So that's a limitation. You're going out to the same folks. You're not getting as much of a diversity of opinion. And sometimes, depending on the audience and how it's built, you can have limited numbers. It's harder to get those hundreds. or to get the wide slice that you might want. But it's definitely something I've seen people leverage well and feel good about the data they're getting from it. Smaller base sizes. I continue to have folks who push and push on, I want more, I want more, I want more. You know, we do one trend study year over year, and every year the client wants to increase the sample size with a B2B population. And I'm saying I can get, you know, fewer and fewer folks over year. I can't get more and more. So I think having realistic expectations for what's a good number, where you have some room to clean people out and to make sure the folks you are getting are really, really good. So even if a panel company tells you they can get you 1,000, you know you're going to want to really make sure this is high data quality. You might want to go down from that so that you give yourself some room to clean that data. And that can still be viable. You know, I get the question a lot, what's a statistically, you know, valid sample size? Any, you know, 100, it's just your margin of error, right? So 100, 200 is still a valid sample, quantitative sample. It just increases your margin of error. And, you know, if you go out there and you say, I want to get 2,000 benefits decision makers at companies with 100 or more employees, know that if you get 2,000, you should really be questioning that data, because getting high quality at that number is just unlikely that everybody's who they're supposed to be. Use branded research when possible, and this relates more to the list side of quantitative research, not panel side, obviously. But when you're sending out a branded send, your response rates are going to be higher. More people are going to respond because of that trust issue that I mentioned earlier, and not knowing if this link is valid, is the survey valid. Having the brand name, especially if there's an existing relationship with the brand, really makes a difference there. And especially, and this is something we're trying to leverage more and more, and we have seen a huge impact here, especially if you can leverage the corporate client doing the send. Because even if I do the send and I say it's from you, there's still a question, right? Because it's not coming from you. I can't spoof your email. That's not legal. So there's still that trust gap. But if it comes from you, from your domain, we're seeing hugely higher response rates. So we've had a couple studies where we tried to do the send, really, really struggled with the completes, and ended up having, you know, going to the client did the send, and it much, much, much higher. And I know there's complications from that. First of all, you can't always do branded research, right? This is when you can, but sometimes you can't. But if you can, even then, sometimes it's challenging, because if you want to link back to your sample, you can't have an open link that the same people take, because then you can't link it back. So then you have to have a different link for each person. So I know there's logistical difficulties with making this happen, in addition to the potential challenges of branded versus unbranded research. But it definitely makes a huge difference. So if you can find ways and processes internally to set up a system where you can do that, it's going to make a huge difference. If you do need to do a blind send, which we do all the time, because certain research you cannot have your name on for a variety of reasons, objectivity, you're doing a concept test that you don't want to reveal that it's you, for whatever reason, brand equity, brand tracking. Couple things, make sure that you're trying to optimize that invite, that email that's going out. And this is for your vendor partners as well. One thing we learned, I don't know, maybe a year ago, don't put $signs in an invite. That's a spam flag right away. So if you're doing an incentive, I'm giving a $25 Amazon gift card, don't put the $sign. It looks weird to write out dollars, but it does make a difference. One thing that was suggested because I had this same presentation at Quirks, and we had a dialogue at the end, and something that somebody suggested that they saw have a very substantial impact on response rate was including the first question of the survey in the invite. So you click actually the answer, you answer that first question in the invite, and then it takes you to the rest of the survey. I'm not entirely sure why that builds a trust or makes people feel it's more legitimate, but this person that shared this who worked for another research supplier like ours, said that they saw, they went from like a 1% response rate to like a 6% response rate. So we're going to start trying that. I mean, there's no harm to see if it works. The other thing that we've been doing, which is more challenging, is to send in smaller batches or even individual emails. That isn't going to get blocked by spam. It's more likely to get through. So we've had cases where, more specifically, if we had a certain subgroup, large employers that we wanted to get a lot of, we did a mail merge and did individual sends to try to boost, and that makes a huge difference in response rate. But it's certainly more difficult. It requires more legwork. I want to kind of overarching make sure that folks are staying compliant when they're doing sends. Spam regulations continue to tighten, and sometimes researchers walk a fine line between compliance and the effectiveness of email campaigns. And I find that usually the clients I work with aren't always familiar with the guidelines and the law and what we can and can't do or should or shouldn't do. So some things I think are obvious and people know, but if you're sending to a list, it should so it's your customer list that you're giving your research partner to do a survey. The respondents should have either opted in or they should have a reasonable expectation to be contacted. Optimize the language that we talked about. Allow recipients the option to know when you got their email. So you're not supposed to do a blind send to a list without letting people give them a link at the bottom that lets them know how you got their email, which is usually who's sponsoring the research. Normally, if they do that, we say, if you do that, you can't take the survey, right? If you click on this link, we'll tell you how you got your email, but you can't take the survey because it's meant to be blind. But hardly anyone ever clicks on it. But I have a lot of clients that don't know you're supposed to do that. You're not supposed to send blind to a list without giving people that option. Obviously, give up the option to opt out. I think most people do that. It's pretty standard practice. Interestingly, in the market research space, and again, I don't know that everybody knows this, publicly available lists are a gray area. So in the work we do at Zeltis, we very often use publicly available lists, for example, of financial advisors that are out there and they're sourced from SEC filings and publicly available information. Market research guidelines are kind of like, that's, maybe not best practice to send to that because they don't necessarily have a reasonable expectation to be contacted to send to them a survey. But I just want to put that out there. I'm not going to take a position on it one way or the other, but that is definitely something to think about. And I will tell you, some of the partners we work with to program and host surveys will not do that, will not send. And it's getting more and more that are saying, no, I can't send to that because it's not an opt-in list. So just an FYI, if you're using that type of sampling, it could be something to think about in the future. It might become more restrictive. So what else can we do? We can use, when it comes to panel, we're just talking about kind of sends and email sends. When it comes to panel, use verified panel partners, particularly for B&B, but they have it for consumer as well. It is more expensive. I talked about the commoditization of panel and how we've tried to drive down this cost. And I think that has had an impact on data quality. The flip side is if you want a panel partner who is verifying that the people on their panel are who they're supposed to be, it is more expensive. So some partners have access to a verified panel either through like a LinkedIn verification, professional licensing lookups, ID requirements, driver license requirements, even for consumers, home verification. There's lots of different ways, different panels. I can tell you without a doubt that the quality is, completely different at a completely different level. When we use verified panel, we might kick out one person or two people. I mean, we just don't. The data quality is all there. You really are getting what you pay for in that situation, which is, I think, my next bullet. Get what you pay for. So, and again, particularly with B2B, it makes a difference. There's no doubt about it. Consider, we've talked about sending your own list, email list, or database that you might have access to. We've talked about panel. There are other sources. Some audiences are really tough to reach on panels. I like to tell folks, I don't know that they always realize, especially if you're doing general consumer research, you're trying to do Gen Pop. Gen Z is much, much lower. They're more low, using the wrong words. They are not as represented on panels as they are in the general population. So they are really not on panels in the same numbers and proportionate numbers. So that other things, obviously B2B is harder to find on panels, Medicaid, respondent. There's lots of different folks that just generally you can't find on panels. There are specialty panels. I know when I was at Quirks, there's a panel that's all Gen Z. That's what they do. They go out and they find Gen Z and they recruit them. But there's other kinds of specialty panels as well. I'm sure most of you know there's physician panels out there, but there's others as well. There are, I'm calling them networking recruiters. They're basically companies that offer sample. They can do quant for you, and they go out and find them. They use LinkedIn, they use networking, they go out and find people who fit what you're looking for. And we've had success with that. Again, it's expensive. Trade associations and publications. So something we've used, another suggestion that came up at Quirks when I presented this, but also something we've done in the past, is reaching out to a trade publication or trade association that fits the audience you're looking for and asking if they can send your survey to their members. They tend to have very high response rates, and you know that the people are who they're supposed to be. Not all of them will do that, but some of them will. We've used Insurance Newsnet, which is a insurance and financial services publication. We've gone out to their members, or the subscribers, and done surveys that way. So you're collecting data, and again, this is more related to panel. Generally, if you have a list, you know the people are at least who they're supposed to be. It's just getting them to respond, to click on your link and take your survey. But when you're doing panel and you're worried about quality from a panel, this is where, cleaning and taking all those extra steps when you write your questionnaire and when you're looking at your data really make the difference. So read every verbatim to make sure that there's nothing. I mean, you can put in lots of tracks and you can put in all sorts of stuff. Nothing is better than a human person reading the verbatims. There are tools, and I don't want to discount them. There are tools out there, companies out there that help you know, like, did someone paste in a verbatim, copy and paste, or they score verbatims on how likely they are to be bots. And those are helpful, but nothing is better than a human reading verbatims, because the AI has gotten really, really good. The bots have gotten really, really good. You read these verbatims, and sometimes the fake ones sound way better than the real ones because they're eloquent and they're using great vocabulary, and it just sounds so great. You love this quote, but something's off. They're not using the words exactly the right way. They seem to be not really answering the question, or you start to see patterns in different answers in your survey. So people who took the survey at different times are saying oddly similar things. Not exactly the same, they're too smart to do that, but oddly similar. So as onerous as it is, and you shouldn't do this, you should have your research partners like us do this, every verbatim should be read. It should be sorted alphabetically and read, because you can find patterns more easily if you do that. And that's the best possible way you can make sure your data, that the people are who they're supposed to be. You can also, and we do things in your questionnaire, ways to check your data quality and build that into your questionnaire. A lot of that can be terminated before it even comes to you, so that you don't have to do the cleaning. Like I mentioned, always have an open end. Always, even if you don't want it, even if you don't want to code it, always have it, because it's the best data quality check. We often, because people tend to, and this is more scammers than bots, but people tend to say yes to everything in a screener because they want to qualify for the survey, because they know how this game works. So we will have either, if we're doing something very specific, let's pretend I'm doing a financial services survey, I might say, which of these following products do you own? And I have a very long list of products. And if someone selects all of them, that is a flag because most people don't own every possible financial services product. If it's a more general survey, sometimes we will have a question like, which of these have you done in the last year? And we will have things like, took a hot air balloon ride, ran a marathon, won more than $5,000 in the lottery. And if they say more than one of those things, that's a flag because most people have not done more than one of those things in the last year. So these are ways to kind of screen people out right at the get-go. Something else we've done is have age in the screener, but then have birth year at the end of the survey. You should know your age. You shouldn't get that wrong. Although we're finding that bots have figured that out. So that's less effective than it used to be. And then attention checks. I think most of us are doing this. They like, please select, 2 for this row or something like that. That's another good way to catch people. Again, this is more relevant for panel, right? If you're using your own list, you don't have to worry that scammers are taking your survey. And then just clean it. I mean, back end data cleaning, it's always been something that we've done as part of the fielding, but it's never been more important than it is now. I mean, I mentioned to you that on some consumer surveys, we're throwing away 50 to 60% of the completes. So it has become more important and to make sure that what you're getting back at the end of the day, when you are presenting your findings and your insights, that they are real people and they really took your survey and they answered your questions with intent. So those are kind of our thoughts, some of the things we're doing, some of the things we're trying to do to help. I really do believe that this is an industry-wide issue and a very serious one. I kind of get on my soapbox a lot when I'm talking to people about this because I just think we're losing credibility. The more, we've had situations where we're questioning, wait, this data, these people said this, that doesn't make any sense based on what we know. And you don't want senior management to start to question the quality of the data because then research becomes, it no longer is a valuable part of the organization if it cannot provide reliable and valid insights. So I think it's in everybody's best interest to work together across companies, across, vendor, client, sample provider to find ways to fix this issue. So I would love for you to share some of the things that you've done. I mentioned a couple that people shared at Quirks, the little things that they're doing to try to increase response rates or make sure they have quality or find a different source of sample. So, I would love to hear in the Q&A what folks are doing.
Amy, we do have a question.
I see that. I brought up Stacey. Yeah. So I have a question. If you can't build your own community, how can you leverage an existing community before it starts to feel and function more like panel sample? I think you can work with a partner to build a community, an external community. I don't know. In terms of, when I think of the word community, I think of it proprietary. It's not a resource that can be shared by others because then it's a panel, right? Then I think of it as a panel if other people can kind of access it. So if it's a community, I find that's usually custom. Now, it doesn't have to be you're building it yourself internally with your customers. It could be you're partnering outside to find people outside to build that community. But I don't know of communities that you can go and access. Again, I guess I would define that more as a panel. So that's the difference. And I understand, sometimes you can't because, like I said, the cost, the investment upfront to build a community is a pretty high threshold. And also another question was, what's the size of a small batch send? So under 50, we have had a little bit more success when we batch under 50 and do sends, which takes forever if you have, tens of thousands of records that you're trying to send out. But it can be done in an automated fashion in most platforms. But even that doesn't always work. And that's when we go to like the actual individual sends, which is, again, obviously we can't do that for 50,000 records. But if we have a particular quota or subgroup that we're trying to hit and we need to get to, a certain number, then that's when we might do that when we have, maybe 1,000 records and we can do a mail merge and do it that way with our own personal email. So hopefully I answered those questions. But again, I haven't seen anybody in chat. If anybody has any other ideas or any thoughts, please don't hurt it to yourself. Let's all like help each other, try to make research better for everybody. And feel free to reach out to me afterwards. I would love your thoughts if you have any more questions about our experience and what we've done. I'm seeing, are there any best practices for the email invite language? Assume branded. Yeah, we've seen some different things. So, and I could share a little bit offline, but if it's branded, one thing is having it come from or in the words of a more senior person in the organization can be powerful. I know, I can't remember their name now, but there's like a group of it's sort of a research organization that's just made up of volunteers. And I know they did some research on this. They also found having an actual video, like a short video, like, please take the survey and here's why, like, here's what we're going to do with this, also increased response rates and really improved that. And it's a pretty low hanging fruit. We've done it once or twice and it does work. It's hard to always get the players to be willing to do that. But that I do think makes a huge difference. I think saying what you're going to do with it and why it's important to your company, again, if this is branded, can also help how it's going to help that person and everyone else, what you're going to actually do with it. I think sometimes we're too try to, not share what the survey's about because we don't want to like lead the witness. But I think especially if we're sending to a list and we know they're the right people, we should be doing more of that. I mean, sometimes we use lists of, I mentioned financial advisors. And when we do that, we used to not say anything about it, but now it's like, I think we should say, if this is about annuities or if this is about life insurance, like, we don't have to hide it. These guys aren't going to, most of them, the vast majority of them are not going to lie to try to take my survey. So I'd rather it be relevant to you. You pay attention to it. You're more likely to take it. So I think giving away a little more information about what you're trying to learn and what you're going to do with it can really helps people's engagement and make them more willing to take the survey. Someone else commented that they do similar types of screening and cleaning that we do, manually reading the open ends, using a screen of which products you own. So good to hear that that's kind of becoming best practice. I think those things really help. Have you seen an uptick in success when utilizing direct mail recently, especially with the burnout around email these days? We have not done it. I don't have a great answer to that because it's more expensive. Postage has gotten really, really expensive, and printing. So we rarely have interest in doing direct mail. So I don't have a good answer to that. The last time we did it was probably 2 years ago, and it was not a great response. I don't know that it was worse than what we're getting with email sends, but it was about the same. It wasn't that different. And then another question, what dollar amount gets you the best ROI? I don't know if that means incentive, like an incentive for a respondent to take a survey. But generally for B2B, if it's a 15-minute survey or under, we find 25 is as effective as 30. There's not really, or 20, but more effective than 20. That's sort of a cutoff. You really have to jump to 50 after that to see a bump. And you see a bump. We did 50. We had a client who just really wanted to get a certain number. And so we did 50, even for a 15-minute survey. Maybe it was an 18-minute survey. And we saw a huge bump. But obviously that's super costly. So 25 tend to be what we do. Again, for B2B. For consumer, I think even 5 or 10 can make a difference. Although we do a lot fewer surveys with consumers where we're offering an incentive. We're mostly doing either panel or it's customers and we're not offering anything like consumer customers. I'm seeing on the healthcare side, I can confirm we've seen a pretty decent response, about 3 to 5%. That's good. I don't know if that's branded, like a branded send with healthcare customers, or if that's blind. If that's blind, that's like the highest I've seen in a really, really long time. If it's branded, that's what I would expect. If you're doing the send and it's branded, to see a 3 to 5% response rate, which is great. not a question, but a tip to improve response rate. Optimize the subject line by testing different subject lines. Great idea. We've definitely done that. We've definitely used different ones to see which. The last time we did that, we actually did not see a difference. There was like really no difference, but sometimes we have, and we then use that moving forward. It's a great way to kind of be doing research on research while you're doing whatever research study you're doing. Someone else said you mentioned to avoid dollar signs in the subject line. However, there are certain buzzwords in the subject line that generate, are there certain buzzwords in the subject line that generate greater engagement, such as time commitment to taking the survey, topics covered, etc.? Yes, I think not as much in the subject line, we try to keep as short as possible, while also indicating that there's some sort of incentive. I think time commitment's important, especially if it's short. If it's long, then that can be counterproductive. But if it's a short survey, that can really help. I think talking about what it is, again, what it is you're trying to learn and what you're going to do with it can be really engaging. Let the person feel like they are making a difference and they are helping. Can be really, that can be more engaging. I can't point to any specific word we use, but that type of language. So the person who got the 3 to 5% response rate mentioned that it was blinded to the end client, branded to our panel. Yes, I mean, so if you have a panel, we always see higher response rates because those are people who've opted in to do research. I think where we're seeing a lower response rate is when it's just a list of emails and we're doing a blind send to that list of emails. That's where we're really struggling with seeing the 0.5% type response rate. But anything where there's a relationship, we're seeing a higher response rate than that. Have you seen an increase in response rate with an advanced email? Yes, that survey's coming. Yes. So often in the absence of our clients being able to do a send themselves, having them say, hey, this survey is coming out, look for it. It's coming from Zeldis Research. Please take it. The same kinds of stuff I said before, like the CMO or the CEO or the head of whatever saying, we really need you to take this, please look for it. Absolutely has an impact. Not as much of an impact as if the send comes from them, but it absolutely makes a difference if people have a heads up. And then we sometimes do that more than once, right? So sometimes we'll do a second one and say, hey, you should have seen this. We're going to send out a reminder, keep a lookout. That definitely over time starts to help with the response rate for sure. I really appreciate all this engagement. It's great to have such a robust discussion. I think we've seen a significant decline in branded client satisfaction experience work using our customer list. Yeah, I've heard that pretty consistently, that even stuff that is being sent by the client is seeing over time a decrease in response rate. And I think some of those factors we talked at the beginning about just people getting inundated with email or using their email less, those are all things that factor in, even if the trust, I know this is who this is coming from, isn't an issue. So, we've heard really across the board every kind of response rate dropping. And, we haven't personally, we actually are going to be doing it this year. Haven't done a lot of text surveys, but that's something to think about too, as a way of reaching your customers. Of email, we're doing like a multimodal where you're doing some text and some email to try to expand your reach a little bit. What % is considered good or great for B2B? For response rate, anything above 1% is pretty good. Anything above 2 to 3%, I would say is great. Now that's blind. If it's branded and there's a relationship, then I would say 3 to 5 is good. Anything over 5 would be great. I mean, we're not going to see 20. I mean, again, if you have a community or you have, in some cases, panels where people have said, yeah, I want to take surveys, this is what I want to do, then we start to see, significant double-digit response rates. I mean, I partnered with a client on their community and we saw 60% response rates. I mean, I was like blown away. But that was people, and they had like I said, they had thousands of people in their community, so they could do surveys easily with hundreds. Again, the investment that takes is significant, but it's certainly fruitful for them, and they really leveraged it. They used it more than I've ever seen anyone use a community, like weekly surveys. So, In a community, is there a specific cadence, monthly, quarterly, of sending surveys that preserves engagement company data? Yeah. So some of that depends on the size of the community, right? So the one I was just talking about that has 1,000 or 1,500 members of, there were 2 different communities, a B2B and a consumer. Like they were there every week, but there was lots of people, so you don't have to send to everybody every week. I think if you have a smaller one, you're not gonna be able to, you're gonna wear people out if you do weekly surveys. But what I find more common, the mistake that I've seen clients make, is do too infrequent touches. Because if it's a community and you want to preserve engagement, we've had clients, oh yeah, we're going to do monthly, but then they can't get that cadence, right? They can't keep up with that. And so now 2-3 months goes by and people aren't touched, and you start to see drop off. So I would say at a minimum monthly, at a minimum. If you can do, twice a month, great. Monthly. If you can't do a survey or, whatever you're doing monthly, you can just do a community engagement activity, right? Here's the member of the month, or here's a share out of something we did last quarter that we thought you might be interesting to see. But you should be touching them at least once a month. And again, I'm happy to I could talk about this all day, because it is definitely my hot button issue. And I'm really feeling like we have to find ways around this to continue to make our industry viable. But yeah, so anybody feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to chat about it. But thank you so much for coming. And thank you so much for being so engaged in the discussion. Really appreciate it.